Well, it's February 18th and we're out on the river unit this morning. My friend Ben, who's actually on the Ohio Pro staff, and my parents came over from Ohio, and we're walking this big section of the river unit. This is an area that we've hunted a little bit in the past. Aaron actually killed the canoe buck about 2 miles away from here, but we're just gonna work this river bottom this morning, and we're basically just looking for sheds, really trying to figure out more about how to hunt this area, because it's really hard to access back here. Like I said, there's probably 2 miles of river bottom, and it's really hard to navigate through because there's so many oxbow lakes, which is basically old meanders of the river that have been cut off. So it creates these sloughs that are really wet, so it's hard for hunters to get back in there. We're gonna get back in here, scout, look for some sheds, and basically tell you what we see along the way. Well, we've been walking for about an hour now, and we started walking along the river. The river kind of bends and has a lot of meanders in it, and we were kind of walking to try to find beds on those points, those oxbows. Basically, what we mean by an oxbow is when the river makes a U shape. We walked down through there, and we did find some sign, but we noticed on the map that there's this old pasture area that I'm in right now, and there's kind of a transition line where the terrain becomes hilly and meets up with that flat river bottom, but also meets this old pasture. So right down here to my left, it's that flat river bottom, but up on these hills, this old pasture. It's got some cedars in it, some pin oaks. There's some pin oaks right on that transition. And once we got up in here, I found a buck bed in this island behind me. As you can see, there's this one big pin oak, and there's a cedar in there as well. And there's a couple beds just tucked right up in there with rubs in them. There's a lot of trails going right out of them. In this direction, there's an alfalfa field. So basically, the reason that a deer would bed here, he can bed here with a wind at his back, looking down into this more open river bottom. There's trails going out of it. There's another bed right behind the camera here. So it's a good little find. I think that if we're gonna hunt this, we're basically gonna hunt down on that transition line. If any bucks are cruising down through here, coming out of these beds in the morning, going to different doe bedding areas, they're gonna walk that transition line. They're gonna feel safe where those two vegetation types meet. Well, we just split up from Ben, and Drake and I followed up this secondary ridge. And first thing we noticed right off the bat is there's all these big rubs on these cedars. There's probably 25 rubs on trees that size or a little bit smaller, but we just found this bed right here, and it's another classic example of where a buck is bedding kind of where those two terrain features meet. There's flat river bottom that meets with these secondary ridges that are coming down, and up above that is crop field. So basically to my left, we've got open river bottom. There's these secondary ridges running this direction, and up on top there's crops. So this deer is way back in here. There's a lot of timber until you get to those secondary ridges, but it can bed right here with a wind at its back and see this whole valley down in here. Ben's coming from an oxbow down there, one of those bends in the river, and he said he just saw about 40 deer jump up down there. So what it seems like is deer either bedding here or down at that bottom. And then that thicket that we were just at, where we found a couple buck beds earlier, is back this direction. So once we got back into the middle, the sign just started blowing up. We're seeing deer sign everywhere, big rubs, beds, very heavily used trails. But that's, again, we always kind of resort back to that. Once we find the middle of a unit, we kind of get back in that area, and that's when we start finding the best sign.
Right on the edge. We've been working our way down along the river edge. Back there's where we found the big buck bedding area. There's a couple points that come out towards the river, and they're about 30 or 40 foot up above where the river is. And Zach was just in this little thicket here and found a couple beds. There's another point he's going over to now. A buck can bed out on these points in this thicket and watch the other side of the river, and then watch the river bottom below him. With the wind coming over his back, he's perfectly safe. We're gonna keep moving along the edge of the river, checking out these points, and hopefully we can pick up a shed and maybe find some more beds.
Hey, we're walking down the road right now. We'll be there in 2 minutes. That's the corner of the field right there. I want to just kind of go down to here, check out this a little bit. If there's a bunch of sign going back in there, we'll go check this out. Well, we just stopped back up at the truck We actually walked the whole north side of the river, probably about 2 miles, as the crow flies, but I think we totaled about 6 miles. And we just came down here. There's a couple bean fields right here, and there's, kind of a staging area in this marsh. And Drake spotted this shed from a couple yards up, and my dad actually just picked up one about similar size. So it's already showing that there's a lot of deer back in here. It's cool to be on the board for sheds on the day, but we're gonna keep going back through here. I've got a couple places in mind that I think are gonna be really good for potential bedding areas. So we're gonna go back here, and it's already looking pretty good with these sheds. Well, right now I'm by one of these little willow trees, and in here it's risen up within these cattails, so it's dry right here. But as you can see, these deer are bedding in here and tucking themselves way down in here. They can't really see a lot unless they stand up, but even if they stand up, they've still got so much tall cover with those cattails that it's gonna be hard to see them in here. But that deer that we just jumped held tight and just busted out of there. But that's the thing, is they can tuck in here and you'd never see them. I was 10 yards from that doe and I couldn't see her, but they're really sneaking down in here. A lot of these beds that we're finding are doe beds, but I think as we work further back into the cattail marsh, we'll probably find some more buck beds, because generally we find crop fields, which are this direction, doe beds, and then buck beds furthest back. So pretty cool to see these beds though. They're really tucked in here. Well, we're just wrapping up our walk. We probably totaled 12 miles and learned a lot about this specific spot on the river unit. Our main takeaways were terrain, vegetation changes, transition lines, and the way these deer bed in this cattail marsh. Anytime there was a real distinct transition line, basically between hardwood timber, which was a lot of maple and pin oaks, and where it would meet marsh grass or swampy area, that's where those deer were bedding and traveling. We see that all the time. It's kind of what we expected, but it was proven to be true back here as well. Another thing that I thought was really cool was anywhere where the elevation changed, there was the ability to see down throughout this river bottom. Every time there was a secondary ridge that came down, there was a buck bed on it. We could tell that there were buck beds because of the rubs going in and out of them, big tracks, and just the fact that they were solo beds on those points. The other thing was, in the cattail marsh, anytime that there was a tree, it meant there was a little bit of a rise there. And just like we learned from Dan Infault, anytime that there's any sort of rise out in an area that can be wet, those deer are gonna bed right there. But hopefully we can keep getting out and do some scouting, find some more sheds, and find a few places to hunt this fall.